Councillor Butler to do the opening karakia, please.
Yeah, right. Tuia ki ranga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia tatu te tangata, ki te kaupapa o te huie nei, ki te kaupapa o te rangi nei, Māori ora ki te tato katoa.
Thank you. Well done. So just some housekeeping before we get underway to the meeting proper. Firstly, can those on Zoom hear us? Hear myself? Thank you, Rohan O'Neill, Councillor. So yeah, welcome to everyone, including those on Zoom. And just for those on Zoom, the requirements are the meeting is being recorded and will be available on, I'm not sure if we do that actually.
Yeah.
Okay. So it will be available on Council's YouTube channel if relevant. Microphones muted unless speaking, and hands up for question, please. And Zoom attendees to turn off camera and microphone during breaks. Just the toilets are out to the left. The fire exit is out through that door or the door, and assembly point is at the rear of the armadillos. If it's an earthquake, drop, cover and hold. Anything else, the public address system will tell us what to do. So we'll ask that all speakers today are through the chair. And secondly, when we conclude this meeting, we'll have a short break and move straight into the workshop. We won't wait till 11:30. So with that, I'll move to apologies. And we have one from James and obviously one now from Mayor Smith for lateness. Are there any others? Would someone like to move those? Move Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Courtney. All those in favour will say aye. The contrary, no. The resolution is carried. No public forum. Declarations of interest. Any declarations, please? Appears not. Late items are none. Move to the confirmation of minutes of the joint Nelson Tasman Regional Transport Committee meeting held on Wednesday, the 20th of March, 2024, be confirmed as a true and correct record of the meeting. Would someone like to say move, please? Councillor Dowler, do we have a seconder? Emma, thank you. And sorry, Emma, I mentioned you in the opening remarks. Welcome again. I did that last time. So I'll put the resolution relating to the minutes. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Move that the confidential minutes of the joint Nelson Tasman Regional Transport Committee meeting held on Wednesday, the 20th of March, 2024, be confirmed as a true and correct record of the meeting. Someone like to move that, please? Move Councillor Dowler, seconded Emma. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, resolution is carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to reports, and the first one is public transport expenditure, and that's in the name of Jamie and Marg. Let's go to that and check. Yes. So welcome, and when you're ready, if you'd like to speak to the report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I will present, as usual, a brief summary of the report and provide some context before inviting questions. Firstly, public transport is usually in the domain of a regional council, which has a very established and usually well-resourced team of officers working in the public transport space. In Nelson and Tasman, we differ in that we are unitary authorities. And historically in our region, public transport has been done on a much smaller and much simpler scale than has been the case in the last 12 to 18 months. And I point this out to set the scene for today's report, because believe me, no council officer enjoys bringing a report to elected members describing an overspend and requesting unbudgeted support. However, the context is important. We have a new and very successful service operating across Nelson and Tasman. As reported to you in the past, patronage is growing, it's breaking records, and each month is exceeding our expectations. However, there have been some challenges in the first year of the service and in the months leading up to it, and officers have learnt a great deal about the complexities and the dynamic environment that is public transport. I mention the complexities because as a jointly funded contract across the two unitary authorities, there are a raft of transfers surrounding this contract and the operation of it. There is income from a number of sources, including Nelson City Council, Tasman District Council, NZTA, the SURF Fund, Climate Emergency Response Fund, and of course the passengers' fares. Subsidy rates differ depending on what part of public transport is being referred to. For example, is it the scheduled bus service or is it total mobility? And the contributions from councils to the contract and operating costs differ depending on the location of the service that we're talking about or the nature of work. And I'll give you an example. The bus contract is split 25% to Tasman District Council, 75% to Nelson. That's the 49% that's local share. But the staff member supporting this is a 50-50 split across councils, as is any advertising or promotion. So it is complex. And it's fair to say that officers and the council managing accountant has spent a great deal of time preparing this report and unravelling things to work out where the true costs lie and to calculate the shortfalls and to prepare the cost scope adjustment that has been submitted to NZTA to cover a percentage of this overspend, 51% we anticipate. That will go to the NZTA VOS committee for consideration, we think around mid-May. It has been indicated that the committee, the VOS committee, NZTA, which stands for Values, Outcomes and something that I can't quite recall, Emma, you may be able to help me there, won't consider a cost scope adjustment until the local share is affirmed. So the report itemises where the overspend has occurred. The budgets for this contract, which commenced in year 3 of a long-term plan, were set in 2020 to 2021. So that's some time ago. And by officers who did not have the in-depth knowledge or experience in managing a PT contract of the size or scale that we have. So as I said, much has been learnt. A large part of the escalations are due to rising costs of drivers' wages and of diesel, noting that 20% of our fleet is still diesel, and these escalations were underestimated. Variations to routes and timetables also account for increased costs, as do the overflow buses that have been required to meet our unprecedented demand. And I'd have to say that's kind of a nice problem to have. So the report deals with the financial forecast for this financial year that we're in, predicting a shortfall, noting that the request has been lodged with NZTA for a cost scope adjustment, and requesting that the Joint Committee recommend to the respective councils that unbudgeted funds are retrospectively approved to cover the shortfall. As I said, it's complex, its contents are detailed, but Jamie, Mr McPherson and myself here can answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Jamie, did you want to add anything further? Thank you. We'll go to questions then. Councillor O'Dell, Stevens, anyone? If not, I'll go to myself. Councillor O'Neill Stevens.
Thanks, Stuart. Just a couple of questions from me. Should Waka Kotahi
You're
not...
on mute, Rowan, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Try again now.
I'm definitely unmuted and there's sound coming
Looks
through
like
on
he's
mine.
unmuted. So that's on their end.
How about now?
Could be our end. Hang on a minute, Rohan. Just try saying something, but we think it may be on our end.
I think it is on your end.
Yeah.
Is my
You've got
mic
better
working?
hearing than me then.
Any luck?
Try now.
How about now?
No, no luck. Do you want to work on that and I'll go to a question? Just in relation, just let's try to break down of where these costs fell. How much can be attributed to the Stoke on-demand service, and was that quite a catalyst for some of this over expenditure?
Mr. Chair, the Stoke on Demand, which you recall has been terminated, there was a cost of 63,000 to set up the app platform for that in the first year. That dropped to, would have dropped had we retained the service, to 25,000 next year. And the cost of the actual service was built into the actual running of the bus was built into the contract price. We estimate savings of between 70 or 80,000 for that going forward. So it's part of the overall cost overrun. Is certainly the driver indices and the diesel indices would have contributed to that.
Thank you. And then just a further one around the cost of going to the airport. I was speaking to Mark Thompson on one day just recently, and he was saying that it's proven to be a really good service, but they're charging us quite a substantial fee I've become aware since. Is there any way that we can negotiate with him on that? Because he was very sort of complimentary, particularly about the consistency of the service, and that's one of the important points for people going to the airport. Of course, they want to know that the bus is going to be reliably on time.
Mr. Chair, the airport service is proving very popular too, so it's been very well received. There was some significant capital expenditure in changes we needed to make to the ramps on approach to the airport and getting through the barrier arms. It's covered in the CapEx. The ongoing OPEX, they're charging us a $13,000 lease to have the bus shelter there. That figure, when we first started that negotiation, was considerably higher, and I believe it was Your Worship, the Mayor Nick Smith, that had some conversations with them. The airport authority is governed by some rules around profit, and they also offer concessions to taxis and others. So there was an element of equity that needed to be applied to that to recover what they needed to from the bus service.
Right. So is that charge from the airport likely to come down over time?
I wasn't party to the conversations had with the airport authority, but Mayor Nick Smith, I believe, was.
Right.
And I don't know. I think we landed on a figure of 13,000. I'm not sure what the scope for changing that is.
Right. Thank you. Shall we try and see if Rohan can speak to us now?
How about now?
Yep. Wonderful. We can hear you, and welcome to Mayor Nick, who's now arrived. We've just gone to questions on the report, Nick, after a brief introduction.
Sure. Can I apologise to the committee? I had a meeting with the British High Commissioner at the airport and her flight came in late. And so my apologies for joining me.
No, that's fine. So Councillor O'Neill-Stevens, and then I'm sure you'll have some questions as well.
Thanks. Just a couple of questions from me, which is, should Waka Kotahi not make their cost share adjustment? What's the additional financial exposure there?
Through the chair, the cost scope adjustment anticipated at this stage is 51% of the overall cost. So it'd be double what we're asking for, pretty much.
All right. And just in terms of those costs, you've helpfully separated out to one-off versus ongoing. My very rough calculation, I'm just wondering if you have this off the top of your head in terms of how much of that is ongoing. Looking at it, I'm sort of sitting around the $300,000 mark. And so out of that, will the cost share adjustment for those portions be ongoing? And subsequently, in terms of the advertising revenue being below budget, are we anticipating that to pick up over time?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll take that question in parts. Starting with the advertising revenue, there was an error made. The total advertising revenue from the back of buses is around $54,000 a year. And that figure is what was put into our initial budgets, but half of that goes back to the operator, SBL, leaving $27,000 between Nelson City and Tasman District. The figure you see in the report, because that contract's only operated for 11 months, is not quite 27,000, it's 24, I think, from memory. So we don't anticipate more advertising revenue coming back to councils going forward. The question around the future. So this report deals with retrospective approval of budget. So going forward, a submission has been made for our continuous program to operate public transport across Nelson and Tasman, and that is considered as part of the National Land Transport Fund. We have looked at our long-term plan budgets, and we have factored into those and into our request to NZTA what we need to cover these escalations, such as the driver and the public transport indices. What we get will be subject to the NLTF, and we will cover this when we address the long-term plans through the deliberations reports. There are so many uncertainties in this space, so the things like whether the public transport financial assistance rate will remain at 51% is by no means certain. The expectations on fare box recovery, the messaging we see through the GPS is that, and some draft pricing and fare documents coming out of NZTA suggest that fare box recovery expectations will be higher. We have potentially road user charges starting on EVs. So all of that information will be coming and potentially subject to the deliberations reports decisions for the long-term plan. We have included it in our requests to council or in our budgets that you see in the draft long-term plans now, and in our application to Waka Kotahi through the Transport Investment Online. And those decisions, I understand the board meets in August, will be forthcoming at that time. And I'm sorry, Councillor O'Neill-Stevens, I can't remember the third part of your question. Could you just refresh my memory? It was really just what is the split between one-off and ongoing costs? So the split is, as through the chair, as described in the report, and the ongoing is, as I've said, we've anticipated that in the draft long-term plan, and if there are any changes to that we know about, we'll put it in the deliberations report, but we've certainly requested that of NZTA. The indications is that our continuous program will be considered, but maybe, in fact, the indications we've had is that the public transport review that we will start in August this year will be a condition of ongoing funding. They will want to see that and be part of that, and it's possible that only the first year of the LTP funding will be approved, subject to the outcomes of that review. And Mrs. Bate may have more to add on that. No.
Thanks.
Right. Well, you'll have a number of things, have you? We'll come to Councillor O'Neill-Stevens, you'd completed there, had you? Yes, obviously. Councillor Courtney, and then we'll come to you there, Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to Officer Marg. Thanks for your report and your presentation too, very helpful. Marg, I'm wondering what part the national ticketing solution costs play in these, the current adjustment costs. You've included them or a part of them in this. And could you just brief us too, please, on that program? And can the community be excited about the introduction of it?
Through the chair, yes, they can be. It's coming. So the rollout for Nelson Tasman is anticipated to be toward the end of 2026. So the national ticketing solution is kicking off in Canterbury, I think next year or possibly toward the end of this year. The reason that has been included in this report is that it's tracking so well that that budget was always in our plans, but it's tracking ahead of schedule. So we've had to pay some bills for that program this year that we had for the future. The national ticketing program is exciting. It's that you would be able to get on a train, a ferry, a bus anywhere in the country using a credit card or even your cell phone to some extent. So it's a game changer. We are part of the regional consortium with 9 other regional councils or public transport authorities using B card. Up until then, but the B card uptake has been also a game changer for us, and this is just the next iteration that's even better.
Just a follow-on
much.
question. There is one council already trialling it, isn't there? The new council.
I believe, yes, Waikato, I think.
Right, thank you.
Another quick one. I'm curious to know something else. The January figures for patronage of the buses. You didn't mention it in there. You said it was increasing and higher than ever before. What was January's figures, please?
I don't have that off the top of my head. Do you?
I'll give it a go. I think through the chair, January was a bit suppressed because of the holiday period, but February set a record of 90,000 passengers, and then March set another record of 92,000 in that order. Sorry, February about 90,000.
Yes.
And March about 92,000.
92,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Smith.
Well, clearly, I am quite concerned about the extent of the cost overruns on this project, and a number of questions flowing from that. The first of them is, with the total of 1.05 million in the cost overruns in the report, to determine that as a percentage of project, because in the first year of the e-bus you would have some one-off costs, establishment, as well as some that are ongoing. What would be the fair baseline to consider that 1.05 million so that then I can make a fair comparison of the 1.05 million as a percentage cost overrun?
Through the chair, we haven't presented the figures in that way, but we were discussing that this morning because we anticipated that exact question. It's in the order of 15%, 15 to 20% of the total.
Okay.
Total operating cost for the public transport services this year, including all of the startup costs.
In answer to questions from my colleague Rohan, you gave some indication, and Emma, the degree to which NZTA Whakakatahi is going to share in that cost overrun. Can you give a definitive timetable from Whakakatahi NZTA as to whether they will, when will we know whether they will accept their 51% share of the 1.05 million cost overrun?
Through the chair, and Ms. Bakley, please correct me if I've got this wrong. My understanding is we need to affirm our local share, which will happen, which we will be taking to the councils on the 2nd of May. The VOS committee is due to meet, I think, mid-May, and I think we'll have delegated authority to make that approval. It won't need to go to the board. So we would hope by the end of May we would have no.
And on a spectrum, and I'm sorry to be speculative, but you know, these cost overruns on projects have occurred before. What would be a fair language to the level of optimism, unlikely, likely, possible, of being able to secure the NZTA share of the overruns? The costs for the ratepayer are significant. It's even more eye-watering in the event that that share does not come through.
Through the chair, I have been having conversations with the investment advisors from NZTA, some long conversations. They've come back and asked for detail, which we have provided, which they've said has been very helpful in guiding the decision-making. In the grand scheme of things, I think our shortfall is quite minor compared to some of the metros. I have been led to be cautiously optimistic.
That's good. I just get some sense of what the level of risk is. What some of the cost overruns seem absolutely explainable. So, for instance, we quite transparently made a decision to defer the startup by a month. because we just weren't confident we were going to be able to do it well. A good decision, I don't regret, but an impact on revenue. Equally, officers brought to our attention the issues about the wage rates of the bus drivers, and that causing a real concern again. Got no problem with those. The ones that surprised me is things like the Wi-Fi installation of $27,000, the launch promotion of $56,000, the bus branding of $55,000. Are those items that there was no provision in the initial budget, or that they ran over?
Through the chair, those are very good questions, and you weren't here for the report introduction, but I did outline the context, and that is the budgets were set back in 2021 in the long-term plan for a contract that was starting in year 3. And there's public transport is a very complex and dynamic space, and there's stuff we just didn't know. So the level of staff experience, there were some oversights. There were some underestimations. There was some overspend. So the promotion of the e-bus we had budget for, but it overran. And I think in hindsight, one of the learnings would be that when you're doing something as big and as significant as this, would be that it needs good project management. And there was a lot of staff movement at the time of the rollout of this contract. We didn't have a public transport staff member. We had the public transport leads that developed this contract resigned for council for good reasons other than this just prior to the rollout. I myself was away, so there was a lot of people contributing to the rollout of this contract, which we were very excited about, and there was a lot of people working on it. But I think the thing it lacked and the big learning from it would be project management, one person overseeing everything and keeping a track on budgets. But some of these budgets were set early, they weren't enough, and there were some costs that we hadn't anticipated. The bus livery one, for example, oversight, the contract says in one part that the operator will pay for sign writing the buses, and in another, it's not clear. You may be able to recall this. I was away, so it was an area of dispute between the operator and us, and as the principals to the contract, the decision was made that the councils would bear the cost of that. So there were some learnings and some errors that contributed to this in part.
The implication always is that we simply pass off the cost as unbudgeted expenditure. Has the request been made, particularly as I'm worried about the flow on into 24, 25 and future years, has a request been made, given the scale of the cost overrun, to look for potential areas where we can make savings in the provision of the service, so that there isn't just simply a further cost falling on the operation?
Through the chair, so the ongoing costs, the requests have been made to meet these things like escalations through TIO. So we have asked the review that will commence in August this year, 1 year post contract start date, will explore possible savings. I mean, we've already made the decision to terminate Stoke on Demand as a saving to this contract. There may be others, but that would be something to be considered in the review.
And of the, and I heard Rohan ask the question, but I didn't hear a crisp answer. Of the 1.05 million cost overrun in the 23-24 year, what is the current projection of the cost overrun for 24-25? In other words, a number of these things that have been identified as one-off. Do we have a clear sense of which portion of them are not one-offs and are going to flow into the cost of providing the service for particularly the next 3 out years of council's funding?
Through the chair, I don't have that figure with me, but I can come back to you on it. But certainly it has been included in our request to NZTA. So we've re-looked at the budgets. We've said we're actually going to need, for example, on average around 100 to 150,000 for escalation. So we've made that request. I'll come back to you with the answer to the question that you're asking, which is what additional money are we going to need in our long-term plans? And I'm not sure yet whether there's that much. We'll have to come back on that. I don't have the figure in front of me, sorry.
I think it is material. and I have to signal to the chair that the current recommendation is us to simply pop along to our two councils and ask us to authorise this over expenditure in the current financial year. I'm not in a position to be able to support that. I would require answers to those questions. I would want officers to go away and see where there are potential for savings. And so I just need to signal that these are project of the size, sums of money of this scale, before I was prepared to support retrospective, additional, unbudgeted expenditure. I would want to know the answer to those questions and whether all those ties have been adequately kicked.
Does that bring you to the end of your questioning and comments?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. So just to follow on from that, just a further question from myself around oversight of this contract going forward. Obviously, Mark talked about loss of staff members and time of flux. What's being done going forward so that we don't get to this situation again in that sort of sphere of oversight?
Through the chair, we have a much better understanding of the money in and money out. So the finances, as it's a new contract, and as I said in my introduction, it's complex with percentages and subsidies and various sources of income and various payments back to TDC. We've spent a great deal of time with our managing accountant getting the right money in the right general ledger line and calculating forward where the anticipated costs are, putting them in the right place. So we have a better understanding of that to start with, because it was very difficult when the public transport officer started in May last year with no public transport experience as such. We had advertised a number of times. The finances were complicated and some stuff was miscoded. So we've cleared that up. That's the first thing. We have secured a new public transport officer who has commenced full-time this week, but is working remotely until April. And he has a very in-depth public transport operational background. He's worked in public transport for 30 years. So there's a set of knowledge skills that are coming to the table that we have not had in the past. I think experience, you can't beat experience and learning. So we didn't have it. You don't know what you don't know, but we now have had a contract for 12 months. We understand it better. We're holding a comprehensive review in August. I have a transport planner commencing in May who has some public transport experience. So the knowledge set is going to be there that perhaps was missing in the past, and the resourcing. This used to be 10% of a very busy person's job, and we've moved to a completely different size and scale of contract. So learnings, experience and resource.
Thank you. So just to flesh that out a little, so the person you talked about, what percentage of that is now working remotely and calculating what percentage of their time will be spent working on public transport, and is that full-time,
Yes.
50%?
Yes, Mr. Chair, his position is full-time, split across, it's funded jointly by Nelson and Tasman. He'll primarily be based in Nelson, but will spend some days out here in the Tasman District Council office. It's a very operational position, but he will have the support of both the Tasman District Council Transport Planner and the new one that is starting with Nelson City Council imminently.
Right. So for Jamie, will we have someone to work alongside him?
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah. I mean, you'll get to meet this new staff member. Brett will come along to these meetings in future. I guess there will remain a risk, right, with staff continuity. You know, keeping good people is challenging, and like Mrs. Parfitt said, it was so hard to recruit somebody in the first place to actually take up that role. And you know, going forward, it's a risk that we now know a bit more about. And I think what we'll be doing is ensuring that we have support and a bit of extra attention around the work that needs doing and the oversight that's required.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess the thing is we're now going to have a year's experience or close to it under our belt, someone with much more experience and in the role and in a full-time position. So it's less likely we'll be in this position in a year's time, or
Without a doubt.
so that does give me a little bit of confidence. Thank you. Councillor Dowler, did you have any questions?
Yeah, mine's more wider than the public transport scenario we've got here at the moment. There is one thing regarding the future of the public transport that concerns me. I know the electric buses are exempt from road user charges at the current time. They're coming in, I can't remember when. I was told an interim date. I've done some number crunching, what I can find in the books that are available online, etc., and I can see an increase per 1,000 kilometres on a bus, the food on buses, between around $837 per 1,000 kilometres, or it could go as high as $1,600 per 1,000 kilometres. So I think staff should be starting to work along the lines of working that out before August, so that we know where we're going. It's pretty basic. It's
For clarity, did you say per 1,000
per
kilometres?
1,000 kilometres. Yeah. So,
Do you
know,
mind a quick sup?
sorry?
Do you mind if I just asked a quick sup on that, Mister? Have
Fine.
any preliminary estimates been done on the estimated annual cost if the electric buses were to pay road user charges on the same basis of other vehicles?
Through the chair, yes, they have. Our estimates are around $550 per 1,000 kilometres, but that's the level of detail that we haven't had confirmed. And
The question was,
Yep.
not per kilometre.
Sorry.
So if it was $550 per 1,000 kilometres, what does that translate to in terms of increased operational costs for the annual e-bus service that we operate?
Through the chair, sorry, I think I got confused. So we anticipate around $550,000 a year. And this comes into effect in December 2025. That's when EVs will become no longer exempt from road user charges. It will come through indexation. And so that means it will be subject to the financial assistance rate from Waka Kotahi, and then split between Nelson and Tasman on the 75%, 25% split. So that means, well, for Nelson City Council, around $150,000 more. We have built that figure into our indexation budgets in our draft long-term plan.
So can I just be clear? I'm understanding it's not going to impact on the financial year 24-25, and it's going to half hit on 25-26.
That's correct.
Good information. Thank you.
We'll come back to you, Councillor Dow.
Yeah, the thing that concerned me was the cost of the infrastructure changes that had to happen to some of the things on the roads. I've spoken to staff that my concerns over these speed table heights over a number of years now. And being an ex-vehicle certifier and a warrant of fitness inspector, the minimum height of a vehicle on the road is 100 millimetre. That's in the warrant of fitness rules. As a certifier, we were able to certify vehicles lower than the 100 mil. The lowest I ever certified a vehicle was 90 mil, taking all the ramp angles and calculations into the requirements that are there. A lot of these speed tables, which you see round, are built higher than that. So when the car goes up and over, the exhaust is able to hang down below that figure of 100 mil. And obviously the buses, we're going to have a similar issue because we had altered the roundabout out here, and we've had older approaches and everything to the speed tables. I'm told that it's an Oz Road scenario that we use for the design of these things to try and save costs. You look at the new ones at the roundabout in Motueka, the approach side of it's pretty cool. The exit side of the ramps are gouged to pieces. So it's obviously the rear of the vehicles as they go off are biting into them. So I do think that everybody needs to have a hard look at the design of these things, for the type of these vehicles, because realistically we've ended up with buses that cost us an absolute fortune to go around and alter a lot of these speed tables that we've put in. So just a comment, and it's wider than the public transport service. It's actually the general thing. I don't disagree with speed tables, but I do disagree with the ones that we're ending up with the construction and the way they're built. That's my comment. Thanks.
If you may have an alternative resolution or an amendment, was that what you were indicating?
Yes, I do. I'm not comfortable in recommending just authorising the additional expenditure and a recommendation to the councils. My view is the right way forward is for us to request a further report identifying what cost overruns are associated with the initial implementation, and for us to get clear figures on what those future years are. I know that informs the LTP. And then the further thing would be, and for officers to report on what opportunities there are for savings or economies, both in this and future financial years. I give an example. I noticed that one of the very significant large expenditures is the level of advertising. That's a value judgment about how much you need to spend. I'm very keen to get a look through on those budgets before we just immediately pass the cost on, and would like officers to look at where there may be savings. I understand that will require an additional report back to the Regional Transport Committee, but I do not feel comfortable recommending to councils with the information we have before us at the stage of just simply saying, okay, we are prepared to just cough this up as budgeted expenditure. I also need to indicate that I would have appreciated an early heads up of the scale of the overrun on budget than what we have received at this time.
Nothing further.
So that my recommendation would not be to proceed with the recommendations to the two councils, but to ask for that additional information for us to then further consider it, and then we'll make our decision about the after we've gone away and asked them to look for where there are economies or savings. Is my preferred way forward.
Thank you, Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can Mayor Nick please restate the areas that the costs that are, you said, not associated with the introduction? If I understood you rightly, you said you're quite settled with those. You want to know, identify, could you repeat for us, please, those items that you want clarification?
The difficulty for me, Councillor Courtney, is that officers have not been able to be clear about, we know there is an additional 1.05 million in the current financial year for the implementation. The bit I'm trying to get squeezed out and be crystal clear on is, well, what is the increased cost for the new year, 24-25? In other words, which of those were associated with the implementation and a one-off, and which are the ones that are going to flow on? So we've asked that question of officers, and I've said, haven't got that. So I really want to know that. And I also would like officers to go away and to say, well, are there any opportunities for us to be able to reduce expenditure in some aspects of the e-bus delivery, such as in the area of promotion, so that there isn't just sort of a culture of actually we just spend money that is unbudgeted. I would like officers to go away and have a look and see whether there is any opportunity for economies. Now, I accept when you are in April, the amount of extra savings you can get between now and the end of the year are relatively limited. We've probably got all we've got out of the on-demand service that we are rightly bringing to a close. These figures would be worse without that. In respect of the issue of the economies and any savings, they are more likely to be in future years. You could do it through the LTP process. My view is it's better for us to do it because it is a joint Nelson Tasman exercise, and we, given the level of the cost overruns, I think we owe it to our ratepayers to give it greater scrutiny.
So I'll come across to Emma.
Ask that question as an alternate member of this committee, but I'd like to follow it up and say to you, would you consider the staff actually responding to the second part of that, the savings and particularly the one that I want clarified too, which is a very variable area, is the advertising type part of it. I mean, you just don't know when people are going to advertise, when they're not going to advertise, so you can't nail down.
Oh no, that's not my area of concern.
My area is, I'm sorry.
No. When I said advertising, you're absolutely right. Council officers will always just make a best guess on the amount of income they're going to get from the buses on the back, and a good explanation from officers about that. The bit we do have discretion is how much we spend on promotion. That is that we're spending quite a large sum of money, quite justified when you first make the change to the service, but I would like to give some scrutiny because that is an area of discretionary spend.
We'll come to
Yes.
Mark first and then to Emma.
Yes, but I just want to add to that because you've given me and Nick a fair run. When a business is growing, it's very difficult to manage. A business of this size, and it's a huge business that we've established here. And I speak from experience, when a business is growing, you've got to go with it. And you don't know, as you go with that growth, 90,000 people in February, 92 in March, 92,000 from what? I won't say zero, incredibly low. But my point today is that we've got to be understanding of the fact that when you build a business and then you get growth, fantastic growth that we've got here, you don't know what's going to happen as you go along, but you must go with it. Otherwise, your custom will drop away and it'll be a poor result in the end if you don't acknowledge that growth and adjust to it as it comes through. That's my contribution.
Thank you. Mark and then Emma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will say there is very limited options with regard to saving money. We have already stopped the spend on public transport promotion. So we are not outsourcing any advertising. We're not placing advertising other than what has been developed in-house using social media. So that budget has stopped. What you see there is a reflection of the huge push that EBUS got, the videos, the graphics that were developed to launch the service, to get people's attention, to get them onto the buses. That budget has been spent and will not be spent anymore. Places where we could save budget between now and the end of the financial year are extremely limited. We could stop the overflow buses, but we will be leaving people on the side of the road, which I would say is quite damaging to the credibility and reliability of the service. People, if they're going to be left on the side of the road, will not plan to catch the bus tomorrow. So we've got overflow buses and we are getting requests for more overflow buses because the service is so popular. So the chances you could stop that spend now and you'd save, I can't recall what the figure is, $10,000 a month. But it would be to the detriment of the service. You could lower the level of service with regard to cleaning the bus shelters. We've got 13 new bus shelters because we've got Transport Choices funding in the city. They need to be cleaned. So we had not anticipated that as a cleaning cost, but they need to be cleaned if they're going to be attractive and your level of service to your bus patrons is a pleasant one. So I just want to point out that the opportunities to save budget now, to cut budgets, is restricted. If you're talking about bigger savings going forward, I can't answer that. I cannot bring that back to you prior to the August review kicking off.
Thank you, Emma. Then we'll try and find a way forward here.
Thanks, Mark. And I think one of the things, we obviously are a partner in the public transport space, and it has been a priority for the government to have a good, reliable public transport service. And our team has worked really closely with officers and certainly needing to ask the very questions in terms of what's in the report and understanding that as well. And we really appreciate the work that you've done to pull that information together for us. The thing that I think is really clear is that to get funding for the retrospective approvals is important to be able to demonstrate that you have local share for that those cost overruns in the current financial year. Otherwise, we can't consider them. So that is a point I just make is a really important one. I think as with the other members of the committee, we see great value in the review and in the need to really unpack the future cost structure and the options that officers have been looking at for making savings and managing the future cost and growth of the service. So I think that is also really important from our perspective, and we will look forward to being closely involved in that process. And that will obviously then flow through to funding in the second and third years of the NRTP period. So I think from our perspective, it's we've really valued the transparency that we've had, and we would encourage you to look at how you can ensure you have a process for getting that local share approved in a timely way.
Do you see anything? Do you see anything that we need, just a question, that we need to do in the immediate future to enable that to happen?
And essentially, the two councils need to approve their local share before we can consider the NZTA Waka Kotahi share.
So you say,
That's for the current financial year.
yeah, so we need to approve that money to secure the Waka Kotahi share.
Correct.
Yeah, I
That would be ideal.
Okay, thank you. Soon, I'm certainly supportive of the information around what Mayor Smith's asked for, but I'm just concerned about at some stage we're going to have to go to the councils with this request, whether that's before or after. I think what he was indicating is that sooner would be better than later. But Alec, are you working on a proposed resolution?
So through the chair, I am, and but before we get on to that, may I just offer my 5 cents worth? I think, and thank you for Emma for the words. Look, as Margaret has said, we find ourselves in this situation, and it is very, very difficult for us to be sitting in front of you today to be asking for this. I think hindsight is fantastic, and I've actually gone on record already noting that the rollout of this PET contract has been the most complex that we've ever been involved in. And I'm unsure, even with the best planning that we would have had at our disposal, whether we would have actually even been able to predict everything that's come our way. I think we face the dilemma at the moment, so I'll put that there. And sometimes we just have to put up our hands and say this has been more complex and complicated than we would have envisaged. And it is a moving feast. It's not easy when you're dealing with increased patronage, which is a positive thing, but the additional costs and everything else that we need to put in behind it to make it a success. I think the dilemma that we're facing in now, in order, as Emma has indicated, that we need to secure that funding, we are going to have to go to this council, to the two councils at some stage to get that money. And I don't like using this expression, but it is what it is. We've expended that and we can't turn back the clock. I can't unspend that. Neither can TDC. TDC or Nelson cannot undo what has been done. And I accept that this is not a good look on something that's been particularly successful. I think that there are discussions behind the scenes in terms of us looking at what this means for the deliberations reports for our two LTPs. And as I've indicated, we are already working on bringing to the council's attention as part of the deliberations report the effect of the RUCs on the contract. And I think TDC we're aligned with TDC in terms of doing that. So there are a couple of curveballs that we've had. We could have done better. There are still some things that we are unable to quantify, but we hopefully will be in a better position to provide that to council, both councils, as part of the deliberations. I'm unsure. I think the questions raised by me, Nick, are valid, but in terms of the one-off costs, I think we'll be able to quantify. We should be able to quantify that. But going forward, we need a couple of dominoes to fall here, and for us to be able to secure NZTA's buy-in and funding, we need our councils to approve this. So I'm unsure. We can do more work and we can bring a report back to you, but I guess I'm appealing to the committee to approve what we have in front of you, so that at least we can get that in front of the council, the two councils that will allow the domino to fall with NZTA, so we can secure that. and then allow officers some time to figure out how that's going to affect the contracts going forward. And as I said, we've already done that as part of the planning, as part of the LTP deliberations. I don't know what more to say. I'm working on something that will give effect to potentially what Menik has said, but that is delaying what I believe that we need to do. But I'm happy to do that. And look, I thank you for your indulgence. I know I'm an officer, and thank you for allowing me to speak. But we are where we are. Could I turn back the clock? No. Would I like to? Yes. But we are where we are.
So what you've been working on, is that a proposed resolution or variation of what we've got, incorporating some of what
Well,
Chair Smith talked about?
in brief terms, and I'll read this out, and I think Elaine Elaine and Kelsey have done a better job. But in essence, it just says that I guess we let the resolutions as they're tabled lie on the table, pending further information back to this committee. We would then need to bring this back with some due urgency, but for us to meet the 2nd of May would probably be impossible.
Awesome. Right, so just for clarity, how will that go with a process around the NZTA funding? And I'm not sure if that's a question for you, officers, or Emma.
I guess it wouldn't, because I mean, I'll let Emma speak to this, but I guess this would just delay the process of us being able to process the NZT funding, because we have to get this in front of our two councils. That's the criteria. We've got to get this in front of our two councils. We have to get this approved to allow NZTA to take that next step. And we are working very closely with them, but they need that domino to fall. Mr. Chairman.
Mayor Smith.
I'm keen to try and find a solution here. I think if I shared with officials what my concern is in terms of navigating a way forward, that may help us find a good process for it. I don't think the separate LTP process is going to be particularly constructive for elected members to be able to give the level of scrutiny that's required for the ongoing impacts of these increases, right? So look, I accept we're so close to the end of the financial year that being able to generate any substantive savings in the next couple of months. Now, so then the big question for me is, well, how much extra are ratepayers going to be asked in the next financial year and the next couple? And do I think we should just leave that to the LTP process? The reason I've got difficulty with that is it's a bit difficult for Nelson and Tasman to be having a separate discussion on that. But I do think, given the scale of a $1 million cost overrun that's occurred in the first financial year, I think we would not be doing a service as governors if we did not give that scrutiny. In other words, I want to kick the tires on the flow-on impacts of what this has for year 24, 25, 25, 26 and 27, 28. The next 3 years are the most important of the LTP. Now, so what's the best way forward on that? I think Alex's suggestion of letting the matter rest on the table is a good one. It's not that I'm expecting those two, because we're so close to the end of the financial year, and can I assure Marg, it's not my view that I want you to consider removing the overload buses. I'm with you, and that is not one of the items that cause me concern. What I am saying as a governor of this organisation is that when a project overshoots by over $1 million in a year, then we owe it to our ratepayers to kick the tires pretty hard to say, well, how are we going to ensure that doesn't occur next year, the year after? I'm somewhat assured, and you are correct, as officers and advising us, when you're implementing a project of this size, there's a whole lot of risks and unknowns you have in your first year, and give you quite a lot of scope for that. But having had that level of overrun, want to, as a governor, be able to kick the tires pretty hard on what numbers you're going to bring forward. Don't think the LTP is the right process for that. Why? Because Nelson and Tasman are having those conversations in separate rooms, and there isn't the expertise and the background. So my desire would be for those retrospective unbudgeted funding to lie upon the table, for us to receive the report, for officers to be able to go away and answer the very distinctive and important piece. And that is how much of that 1.1 million overrun is going to flow into those years 1, 2, and 3 of the LTP. For us then to have a further meeting when we've got the report back on that, I would like officers to say, hey, and what are the areas for any potential areas of savings that are practical, not those that are going to diminish. There's not a person around this table that's not committed to the ongoing success of e-buses. And at that point, for us then to be able to make good numbers on, hey guys, this is the hit we're going to have to take this year, and this is what the flow on impacts, that we can then have a smoother process through the LTP. The alternative is that the two councils separately start digging into the detail of the public transport component for the LTP for those future years with this level of uncertainty, because we've had such a big cost overrun. And that's why I think it would be better for the Regional Transport Committee to do that.
I'll come to that point, last point later. I'll go to Councillor Butler and then Councillor O'Neill-Stevens. They may well cover the point we're concerned about. Councillor Butler.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, one of the things that we can't quantify in this is the emissions that are saved. The public transport is featured in our climate action plans, and there's huge numbers of people who are using public transport are actually reducing emissions. We can't quantify those that I'm aware of. Whether or not we can is a question. So I think that we're sort of this is reducing emissions, and our climate change policies are going to cost money, and that's what we're facing now. So I totally see that there have been problems with the way this has been actually done, but looking at the bigger picture, this is about reducing emissions and limiting climate change. So from that point of view, I think that that's an important thing to consider about this cost overrun as well.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor O'Neill-Stevens.
Yeah, I guess just in listening to the discussion, there's a couple of things where we have been provided what is the one-off versus what is ongoing. My question was really to avoid me doing maths. Maths I've now done, which is that $317,500 of that is ongoing costs, as identified in the graph at 14.3 or the summary table. My other reflection would just be that what me and Nick is describing is our regional public transport plan, which is the remit of the RTC, which is ultimately what we'll hand up to councils for budgeting through the LTP. And so I think structurally, from a governance perspective, that budgeting and planning already sits here at the joint RTC. And so I'm just not clear where the sort of expected divisions between doing that work here versus doing it through the LTP is, when right now we already do the work here and then pass it on to the respective councils to budget through their process.
Thank you. Who was next, if anyone? Oh, Jamie.
Councillor O'Neill-Stevens sort of covered it. The information is available to a large extent in table 4.13, or sorry, section 4.13, and the ongoing costs that are identified in that table have been described in the table as some of them being catered for in the LTP already. So on the face of it, the answer to His Honourable Mayor's question is, for 24-25, it will be somewhere between $0 and $300,000 is the best estimate we can give at this time. There are a number of moving parts in that, which makes it complex to assess. The indices associated with public transport costs are, we can make estimates on how we see or predict those indices will move over the next 12 months, but it will be an estimate. We can make informed estimates on what our fare revenue will be, but again, it will be estimates and projections. So there is quite a bit of work involved in preparing, that level of detail. But I guess the question is whether that would change the committee's view on the resolutions that we've put in the draft report or in the report in the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, appropriate. If it's appropriate to respond, here's my nervousness. I strongly dislike having large chunks of unbudgeted expenditure being authorised retrospectively. It's happened. There are some good reasons for it. When you're implementing a big project of this size, it's happened. But as governors, we need to learn from that experience. My view would be that we collectively did not give the level of scrutiny we should have in asking some of the questions about some of these items that we're in. Can't undo that. But when you get that scale of unbudgeted expenditure, there's an extra obligation on us as the governing portion of council to make sure it's not going to happen again next year. So the reason for me wanting to get some more information and to give it some scrutiny is when you say to me that in the next financial year, 24 to 25, some of these increased costs are going to flow into it. And I wish to have a session with you and a report to be able to scrutinise those. And what is my aim? My objective is to try and ensure we're in as good a position as possible, that collectively, both officers and elected members are not sitting here in April 25 saying, oops, we made a mistake again. We've got another several $100,000 of unbudgeted expenditure. And so I just think I don't want to be too tough on anybody. When you do a big project of this sort, you do get these items, but I do think why I'd like an additional step before authorising it is to give us the opportunity to scrutinise and ask questions of what is being budgeted in the next 3 years so that we don't end up back in this position. That's the motivation for the scrutiny I want. And when you say to me, look, and I accept Rohan's sort of off-the-cuff calculation of which ones of these are one-offs and which are potentially flowing on. Yes, that's true. I worry about the unknowns. And we know we're flushed out and there's been good work done on identifying the road user charge. What other ones are in there that we know? And I'd like to get all that information there in that process, not in the LTP process, to give that level of assurance that we will not be in this position again with large unbudgeted expenditure associated with public transport. Do that workshop, get that robustness, and then I think we've got a clear channel going forward. And I think that our community and our ratepayers, when you've got a $1 million cost overrun, are more likely to accept it that we're responding to that problem and saying, hey, look, we are going to do some extra work to make sure that there aren't repeats of this in future years. That's where I'm coming from.
I'll have to come to you
And look, thank you through the chair. Look, what everybody's saying around the table is fair and reasonable. Can I put another option on the table for consideration, and maybe then we take a bit of a break and think about it? But could I offer that we do a two-part, which will address us getting this in front, getting the over expenditure in front of our council and allowing the NZTA process to proceed with urgency. But then we work on another resolution. So we keep resolutions as is that allow that process to happen. But then we also add another resolution requesting that a report still come back to the RTC to potentially address those two questions in terms of the current savings, and then also a bit of a debate around the LTP option. So I'm trying to do the best of both worlds here, that we allow a combination which should address hopefully my next concern, as well as us being allowed to get that over expenditure in front of our council with a discussion afterwards in terms of how we could potentially save it, but at least it allows us to get the NZTA process moving. And granted, we need both of the approval of both councils, but I think that's potentially a good compromise. So I put that to the table.
Thank you. And principally, that's where I was going. I guess we're all concerned about the overrun, but we're also concerned about getting that money approved so that we collect the NZTA money. So I think your suggestion of both that and a break are a good idea. So I'll go to Barry and I think we'll break for 10 minutes for tea. And then that'll give officers and elected members an opportunity.
Yeah, well, that was similar to where I was trying to hit. All I need to know is, will the committee be doing a presentation to each council during the LTP process? And if we do get that report back here and approved by the committee before the submission period, which is pretty tight, but then both councils would hear, staff or whoever presents it, hopefully exactly the same words, and then be able to ask questions on that, and then we can sit back as councillors doing the LTP and make our decisions from there.
We could submit a placeholder perhaps just broadly to both councils so that someone could speak.
So through the chair, what I envisaged is that because this is a joint issue between NCC and TDC, I was proposing, and Damien Maldred may be looking at me strangely after this, but I was proposing, I think both of our council meetings are on the same day, on the 2nd of May, I think. But I was hoping that we could maybe stagger these items when they come to our council, that both the officers could be present when we present the over expenditure to each council, so we are telling the same story, and be able to answer the subsequent questions. We've always anticipated that as part of the deliberations report, where I do think this sits. I understand that the RTC needs to have oversight of the public transport, and they do have a right to understand what the implications are going forward. The mechanism that we have, the mechanism that we have at our disposal is to present that as part of the LTP deliberations, and we were planning to do that. If there's another step which we're suggesting here, is to bring that to this RTC to provide that information that will then feed into the LTPs, that is not unhelpful. We will potentially need to raise and have that workshop, whether it's a workshop or a briefing or another report. We need to look at the best mechanism of doing that. We can schedule that in advance of the LTP hearing, so that the elected members sitting around here are actually informed when it comes to the LTP deliberations. And so I'm thinking what we're proposing is a 1-1.
It's a process issue going forward. We'll just have to get through. So I think what we'll do now is break for 10 minutes, have a cup of tea. So if everyone likes to take their seats, we'll resume the meeting, please. And we have some proposed resolutions on the board. I think the two right at the bottom are for the respective councils, aren't they, rather than for us? So it's just the 4 at the top that we're looking at.
No, so you're looking at all of them.
Right.
And so what we've agreed was that number 4 will cater for the interim measure for us to take the bottom 2 to each council. Both officers will present, get the retrospective through that will allow the NZTA process to follow. But we've added in that additional step to have a workshop with the report. We've scheduled it for the 3rd of May to address the additional projections that will guide the long-term plans. Right. So that's the additional. The rest stay the same.
Right, and the 3rd of May is relatively clear on our calendar.
We cancelled an RTC and we'll just reinstate it.
Right. So the lesson there is don't always cancel. But the 2 ones at the bottom, that will be to those councils to approve those.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
So they're just there for our guidance, rather. Correct. Yeah. Understand. As someone of a mind, I'm happy to move the resolution from the chair. Do we have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. Do we have any further discussion, debate before I put the resolution? Who's got their hand? Is that right? Yeah, Councillor O'Neill Stevens.
Yeah, look, just a brief comment on this one. First up is just, I think we need to look at this in the wider context of public transport systems nationwide, where we've managed to start essentially a brand new program. Yes, we previously ran the N-bus, but this is to a scale that we've actually never delivered previously. And I think as part of that, I'm unsurprised on the whole seeing some of these costs. I think it's worth reflecting as well that the three largest figures in the 4.13 summary table is the PT cost index, something entirely out of our control, and then staff time from the customer service and transport business units. And I think that really that staff time is a reflection of just how much has been put in to make the service as successful as it is. Obviously, we want new projects and new services to run perfectly to budget without cost overruns. And it's important, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that we'll have to further interrogate these costs and make sure that for our future budgets, we're accounting for them. But in the context of this, it's important to understand as well that this was not a single project. This was a wide range of smaller capital projects, of operational work streams, all coming together to form this new service. And officers have acknowledged points that they would learn from going forwards in terms of how to project manage something of this scale. But we need to understand it as a deeply complex and not always entirely integrated system. It was acknowledged in some of the questioning, and I just want to further highlight it, is that I think we also have responsibility around where perhaps there were governance gaps in this system and in this process where we approved the overhaul of this public transport system. We've had an election, we've decided to go to a joint RTC, where previously, at least from the NCC perspective, we had the NCC RTC plus the infrastructure committee overseeing this. We then had a joint RTC and no infrastructure committee, and I think it would be fair to say that just that massive shift in how we were governing these types of projects meant that inevitably there would be some gaps in terms of our oversight. I think that particularly the formation of this joint RTC is a great move to avoid those future gaps and actually provide a more consistent approach. But again, I think we have to reflect back onto that national picture. And if we look at the consistency and the reliability of this service compared to anywhere else in the country, I think that these primarily, again, one-off costs is what it takes to actually set up something new from scratch. And whilst there's plenty to learn from it, I just want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that officers put in to actually getting this service off the ground. There's another world in which we're being faced with a much gloomier picture, which is everything went wrong. We couldn't get the service going in the way it has, or we got it up and running and then allowed it to fall over. And I don't think any of those would have been the options that we'd be happy with as a committee. And so just really want to acknowledge the work of officers and say, whilst this isn't by any means the ideal situation, in the wider context, it is understandable. We need to make sure that we learn from it, that we're budgeting appropriately for future years. But I appreciate the forthrightness and the free and frank relationship we've had around these issues to be able to understand them and move forward productively.
Thank you. Mayor Smith, sorry.
No trouble. Just to make some overall comments on the resolutions, which I'm supportive of. I share the view of the Deputy Mayor of Nelson that the new e-bus service overall has been very successful. And I also accept the advice from officers that it's been a hugely complex project to take over. And I remain very proud in Nelson and Tasman that we had led the country in providing the first 100% e-bus service from our community. But I also think when a project runs over budget by $1 million, that for us to do a bit of honest reflection around, well, what are the learnings from that and what should we do from here? It is not the only project around the country that will have gone over, and that $1 million is of the order of 15 to 20%. Some of the cost overruns are directly related to the very high inflation, and that needs to be acknowledged. But also some of these were should have been foreseen and were not included in the budget, and that's where there is some learning. When I was first elected as mayor and recommended the approach of a joint regional transport committee, I did have a discussion with the chair as to whether we needed a specific project oversight group, given the scale of this project. In hindsight, I regret not pushing further on that. That may have brought some of these issues to a fore more early. If there's a lesson for this joint regional transport committee, it would be my view that if we embark on another major project, that we do have an oversight committee that can get more up-to-date things to pick up with some of these issues earlier and be able to respond. The additional work that we're being asked for is very much in this context, and I just want to be clear for both the community and for officers. Everybody can accept when you're doing a big reform of implementing a whole new service with the e-buses that there will be some cost overruns and some bumps on that journey. I do think we've got a duty to make sure that we're not sitting here either in April 25, 26 or 7 and involve other very large sums of unbudgeted expenditure having to be authorised. And so the purpose of that additional workshop is for us to be able to give really good scrutiny to what we can do for those 3 future years going into our LTP, to insulate ourselves as much as you can. And there are always things that have to come out of left field that you can't predict. For us, at least, to do our duties as elected members, to give good scrutiny to those budgets so that we can provide a high level of assurance for our ratepayers and community that while we have to suck this initial over expenditure up, we're doing the extra work to make sure that we're not going to again be in that position in the next 3 years out as we put the LTP together. Unfortunate, some learnings, but still overall, the officers and council should take pride in what's been achieved with the new e-bus service.
Thank you, Councillor Dowler.
I'll just go as far as say that I agree with what Nick's just said. I've become sort of a semi-frequent user on the bus home. And I hopped on the bus out here yesterday, and when we left, there was 5 empty seats on it. She was shocking. When I hopped off, it was a stop before Motueka at Tasman. There were 8 empty seats because people had hopped off as we went through. But amazing, it's just been getting fuller and fuller. A friend of mine that travels over each day to see his wife and Nelson, he hopped on the bus as soon as it started going because he comes across every day the bus runs. And he said it's just growing like mushrooms, mate. He just can't believe how quick it is taking off, and he really appreciates the service because he couldn't afford to come over every day if it wasn't a bus. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And so just final concluding right of reply remarks from myself. Yes, it's been a very successful, and it was a real step forward for both councils and communities to go to a fully electric, more frequent service than we'd had previously, with a much higher level of support from the communities, both the Richmond and Nelson communities, and also the outer communities of Wakefield and Motueka. Barry's just alluded to how much it's grown in a relatively short time. Sometimes these things take a much longer uptake. I think there are some learnings, and we can retrospectively, it's always easy to be wise afterwards. And we were going for a time of change with what I've just spoken about, but also the way that we govern. Previously, we had two separate committees. We had a joint committee. So it was a bit of a learnings, and something that we perhaps need to consider if we were to implement a project of this scale again in the future, just how we manage that both from a governance and staff level. And unfortunately, there was some changes at staff level that haven't helped, I suggest. And there's those things we can query further at the workshop that we've alluded to. I think we've all got learnings going forward, and hopefully we'll be in a much better position this time next year when we're reviewing the forthcoming year. But certainly the demand, and even at Tapua consultation meeting last night, there was generous interest and support for the buses, even for the outlying community who would have to go to Wakefield to use it. So people are generally supportive around the things that Councillor Butler talked about, the opportunity to reduce emissions for less vehicles on the road, and all of these things make an overall package for the district of a real advancement. So I think it's been a wonderful thing and for the community now and going forward with these, even with these few, what I'd call hiccups. So with that, before I get too tongue-tied, I'll stop and put the resolution. But thank you all for your words around that, and just thanks to the staff who've presented this morning with, what's the word I want? Very well, I guess, given us the real lay of the land, so that's appreciated. So with that, I will put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, resolution is carried. I think that brings us, look at the run sheet there, to the closing karakia. Who would like to do that? You like to do that, Mayor Smith?
I would be happy to.
Have you got there, or do you?
I do indeed. Tuia Karonga, Tuia Te Raro, Tuia Te Waho, Tuia Ki Roto, Tuta Hi Tangata, Koronga Te Po, Koronga Te Ao, Homie Hui Taikie.
Thank you. Thank you all for your attendance and enthusiastic input. That's appreciated. We'll just take a 5-minute or make it 8-minute and we'll start the workshop actually on time. I thought we'd be there much sooner, so we'll start the workshop at 11:30.